He's cute, easy to make with scrap yarn, and in less than an hour, he's sitting on your desk or your Christmas tree. So all you have to do is get your 24 peg loom, 40 yards of yarn, 10 grams of stuffing, a tiny bell, and your favorite decor. And if you want a full list of supplies, more information, be sure to visit the website at LoomaHat.com/gnome. All right, Looma, without further ado, let's begin. We're going to start by knitting the hat, and I'm going to use this single strand of worsted weight. I'm going to secure it to the anchor peg using a simple knot. You can use a slip knot if you're more comfortable, and I knit from right to left. You can go from left to right, doesn't matter. Take the working yarn behind that peg and wrap it. As you guys continue to wrap these 24 pegs, I'm going to take a moment to say thank you to Carol Maple from PromiseLearningATL.com, Elise Bertrand, and Penny Pitchard for covering the cost of closed captioning. All right, we're going to knit the row using the U-wrap version of the knit stitch. So take the working yarn, put it over the existing loop, and you're going to half wrap that peg. You see how it creates a U? And with your hook, take the bottom loop over the top and knit off. Again, to do that U-wrap, you half wrap the peg and you knit off. Now let me focus a little better so you can see this with more clarity. Here we go. Again, I half wrap, which creates that U, and I take the bottom loop over the top and I knit off. Now you can use the flat version or the true version of the knit stitch. Please don't use the E-wrap. It's going to completely change the look of the project unless you want to use double strand, in other words, knit with 2 strands of yarn as one, or use some kind of thicker yarn, then that'll work. All right, once you knit off peg 24, you're done with the cast on, and we're ready for rows 1 through 25. Super easy. All you're doing is continuing to knit just like you did before, all of your rows, but this time you need 25. Now after a few rows, I want you to go ahead and get your hook and take that knot off the anchor peg. You don't want to leave it there. If you do, your fabric is going to look really odd. All right, just keep knitting. After you're done knitting those 25 rows, we're going to start decreasing, and there's a lot of ways to write this out as a designer and put it into a pattern, but I want to make this super easy for beginners. So instead of using some really complicated technical terms, I'm just going to say decrease by 1. So we're going to start with this peg right here, and you're going to do the same thing every time you start a row. You're going to first decrease by 1 peg. In other words, you're going to cast off 1 peg and then knit the row. The first thing you need to know, we're no longer knitting in a circle. We're going to be knitting flat. So we're going back and forth. We're going to start off by changing direction, because normally we would be going over to peg 1, but we are going to cast off 24. So you're going to take your working yarn, skip peg 24, go to peg 23, and knit off that loop. And then take the loop off of peg 23, bring it over to 24. You're then going to knit off that peg and take the loop off the peg, the remaining loop, and you're going to take it over to the empty peg to the right. Or if you're knitting opposite from me, you're going to do the opposite. The point is that now we have an empty peg. You see that? That was your first decrease by 1, and now you're going to knit the row. And in the direction that I'm going now, I'm going towards peg 1. And by the way, I have 2 kittens, so if you hear something that sounds like the house is being destroyed, it's just 2 little kittens. They're super happy right now. Okay, so just keep knitting. You need to get back to peg 1. After you knit peg 1, you're now getting ready to knit off that peg, to bind off. Just like you did peg 24, you're going to do peg 1. So you take the working yarn, and now we're going in the opposite direction. You're going to skip peg 1 and take it to peg 2, put it over the existing loop. You're doing a U-wrap and knit off. Then you take the loop off of peg 2 and you're going to take it over to peg 1. That's the peg you want to bind off. Now tighten your stitch. I forgot to tell you that last time. And then take the bottom loop over the top because you need to knit off that peg number 1. And take the loop off peg 1 and bring it over to the peg that's empty, which is peg 2, and tighten the loop. Now you're just finished 2 pegs, both of them. You've decreased now by 2. And now you're going to head towards peg 23 because now you need to knit that row. Same thing you did before, right? You're doing the same thing now. So you've decreased by 2, but we need to continue to decrease. So you're going to go back to peg 23 and do the same thing. You can see as you continue to decrease that you have an edge that looks like this. It's nice and neat. You're going to use those edges to sew the sides together. So you're continuing to decrease until you're left with just 4 pegs with loops on them. At that point, take the working yarn and wrap it around the entire loom, and then cut the working yarn and get your hook. You're going to take that working yarn and put it under each loop, and with your hook you're going to scoop it up and feed it through each loop. So the working yarn is put under the existing loop. With the hook, scoop it up, feed it through, and you're going to do that through all 4 loops. When you're done with that, with the hook, take the loops off their pegs. Again, there's 4 of them left. And then once you've done that, it's now your fabric is free from the loom, and you just need to stretch those stitches. This is really important, otherwise the fabric looks very odd. You don't have those nice clean V's. And we're now going to go ahead and get a needle. I'm using a metal. You can use plastic. I've become very partial to the metal needles. You thread that needle with the working yarn, and we're going to feed it again through those 4 loops to kind of close things up and so that it looks a lot neater. And then we're going to start sewing the 2 sides together. So bring everything close up. In other words, bring the 2 sides close to each other, and then you're going to sew side to side and then up. So here we have these 2 loops. I'm going to sew side to side. Then I go up to the next pair. And I want to make this as seamless as possible. And so you can manage that with this strand of yarn. You bring these 2 sides, and you see I make sure I line up the 2 stitches from each side before I sew. So I am sewing side to side, and then I go up to the next set of stitches. And I try to keep this lined up correctly. And when I go through from side to side, I don't pull on it too tight, because if you pull on it too tight, the stitches are going to bunch up, and then again you can see the seam that you're making. It becomes very visible, and that's not what you're wanting. You're wanting for that seam to kind of disappear. So up to those 2, right? 2 on each side, and then up to the next set. And I apologize that I kind of went off camera right here, but you can now see what I'm doing. I pull the thread, but I make sure not to pull it so tight that I don't bunch up the fabric. And I try to make sure I line this up as much as possible before I start sewing. So work your way through this section right here slowly. Don't rush it. Keep sewing till you get to the part where the hat comes together again. Finish off the last bit just to make it as neat as possible, and then you're just going to take that leftover strand and push it to the inside of the hat, and don't worry about it, you can cut it or not, doesn't matter. Put the little hat to the side, and now we're going to work on the body, or it's more like a little ball where the hat goes on. Again, we're going to use a single strand of worsted weight yarn that I'm going to secure to the anchor peg with a simple knot. You can use a slip knot if you're more comfortable. And this time for the cast on, we're using a different method. It is the drawstring cast on. So take the working yarn behind peg 1 and bring it to the front of peg 2, behind peg 3, in front of peg 4. And you're going to continue with this zigzag technique of placing the yarn on the loom. Again, it's in front of one peg, behind the next one, in front of one, and behind the next one until you get to peg 24. And then when you reach peg 1, you're going to take the yarn behind peg 1 and then lay it loosely over the next few pegs. And with your hook starting on peg 2, you're going to knit off every peg that has 2 loops. Now you missed peg 1 and you're only going to miss peg 1 this time. All right, you're basically ignoring it because it has no loop right now. But as you continue around the loom, again, you're knitting off every peg that has 2 loops, and you can clearly see that that is every other peg. It's the peg where you put the yarn in front when you were adding the yarn to the loom. And then once you're done knitting off peg 24, peg 1 will have a loop once you knit off the second one. All right, sounds confusing, but I want you to follow me. There is no loop right now on peg 1. For rows 1 through 24, you're going to, rows 1 through 25, you're going to knit the row, but only on this row. On row 1, you're going to skip peg 1 because it has no loop and knit off peg 2. So you're going to continue to go around the loom. You're going to knit all your 24 pegs using the U-wrap version of the knit stitch, and you need to do 25 rows. And remember, on row 1 is the only time that you skip peg 1, and that's because it had no loop, right? You gave it a loop once you started, and you took your yarn and you knit off peg 2. So you see here I am on row 2, and now I'm knitting that peg. I hope that wasn't confusing. You're just gonna knit the row. Just like when you were knitting the hat, after a few rows, don't forget to take the knot off the anchor peg. And once you do that, you just continue knitting. Remember that for this part, for the little ball, you need 25 rows, or you're just knitting all 24 pegs. When you're finished with your 25 rows, you're then going to take the working yarn and wrap it around the loom one time. Get your scissors, cut the working yarn, and then get the hook and place the working yarn under the peg 1 under the existing loop, and with the hook scoop it up and feed it completely through that loop. And now you're going to continue to do this for all of the pegs. You're going to feed that working yarn from the top, you scoop it up and feed it through every peg on the loom. Once you're done with that, we're then going to go ahead and remove the pegs from the loom, but please make sure that you don't skip any. If you skip even one, your project can completely fall apart. All right, so once you made sure you did that, you're here at peg 1, and you're going to take the loop off the peg. You could do this with your hook, you could do this with your hand, whatever is more comfortable for you. You're just getting the loops, all 24, off the pegs. Once you finish taking the loops off the peg, your fabric is free. And now the next thing you need to do, of course, is to stretch your stitches. So make sure that you do this to all sections. It curls a little bit, so the top ones may not be as stretched out as you need them to be. So just make sure you get the whole tube, and then just pull on the drawstring. And some of the loops might not want to cooperate. Just pull on them a little bit and then pull on the drawstring, and everything will close up nice and neat. And then what you want to do is get a needle and thread the drawstring with the needle, and then start feeding that needle through those top loops, the cast on loops. And every so often you'll skip a few of them, and as you sew a few, pull on the drawstring to start closing up the opening. And then when you're done, more or less, you can start stuffing the little body. And I used, like I said, about 10 grams of polyfiber fill. Then go ahead and close the top again by threading that needle with your drawstring, and you go through it in a circular manner, every now and then skipping a few of them so that it starts to close up better. And just keep, sewing and pulling and sewing and pulling until it's nice and closed. And if you want, you can put a knot on this. It's not a biggie because you go around with the yarn so many times you don't need to, but just in case, that's how you do the knot. And then just put the yarn through any spot, pull on it, cut it, and you could do the same with the top when you're ready. Now you're just going to put that little part to the side, because next we're going to work on the nose. And for this, like before, we're going to use one strand of yarn. I'm going to secure it to the anchor peg, and then we're going to drawstring cast on 7 pegs. So we're knitting flat. We're going to turn around and knit off all of the pegs that have 2 loops. You guys already know how to do this. Now here's a tricky part because we're knitting flat. Here on peg 1, you're going to take your yarn and you're going to wrap it to the back on peg 1, bring it to the front, and knit off peg 2. Right? It was like a little figure 8 that you did on peg 1. You're only doing that for the first row. Now here's row 2, and you're basically just going to knit off. For the nose, you need 9 rows. So you're going to continue to do this. Remember that the cast on does not count as one of these rows. So you keep knitting. You're knitting flat, which means you're going back and forth. So when you get to that peg, you turn around. Don't forget to take the knot off the anchor peg, of course. And then keep knitting because, like I said, you need 9 rows. Once you've done those 9 rows, then you're going to take the working yarn and you're going to spread it over 8 to 9 pegs to give a long enough tail. And just like before, you're going to feed that working yarn through all of those pegs. So from the top, you scoop up and you feed the working yarn through it. And then once you've done all 7 pegs, go ahead and take those loops off the pegs, and your fabric is off the loom. And now, just as always, you're going to stretch your stitches. Make sure you do this really good, and then pull both drawstrings, the cast on and cast off, and you're going to create like a little tube. So take those 2 drawstrings and tie them together. It creates then like a little nut, right? A little circle. And you can go ahead and make a knot with them if you want to, and then take a needle and you're going to thread the needle with one of the drawstrings, doesn't matter which one, in order to close the 2 sides, because when you bring them together, it leaves an opening on both sides. So just like you did the hat where the decreases were, you're going to do the same thing with this little nose. You're going to close the sides. You see that? And then once you do that, you can start to shape it, and it starts to shape and become a little rounder. We kind of want it to be, you know, large and wide for the little face because that's how it's supposed to be, right? You're going to leave these little strings out because that's how you're going to attach the nose to the face. Now we're done knitting and it's time to assemble, but before we do that, we have to make the beard. So take your yarn, whatever color you want to make the beard, and in about 3.5 inches, which is what I have for my 4 fingers, I wrapped about 35 or 40 times, I'm not sure, about more or less 30. And then I get a single strand and I pull it through the whole bunch, right? And I make a knot on the top part. And I'm going to put 2 knots on it. And I'm then going to get my scissors and cut the bottom. And that gives you that mustache, right? It's almost like making a pom-pom. But you cut it, the pom-pom, at the bottom, and you leave it kind of stringy. Now I'm using this really long plastic needle. I love these for toy making. They've become really a good part of my toolbox, and I use that to pull the 2 strings through because I'm going to attach this by making a knot on the back, and then I put it through the top of that beard. I'm going to then feed those strings that I had for the nose, one of them, at least the longest one, I'm going to feed it through because I'm also going to tie that to the strings that are in the back. So I'm going to make knots. Another way to attach this, by the way, is you can just use a glue gun. I'm going to come back with a glue gun anyway to secure all of my parts, but for now, to put them in place, this is what I like to do. And I wouldn't worry about how this looks right here because anyway, you're going to put the hat over that. So none of this yucky looking knots and strings are not going to show. So then I'm going to take this short string and feed it through as well. Then I'm going to give these strings a bit of a haircut because I want it to look neater. If you like kind of like a scrubby look, then you can make your beard super long and just don't cut it, right? And it'll look kind of scrubby. That might be something that you're interested in. For me, I kind of wanted mine to look, you know, I wanted it to look homemade, but I wanted to give it more of a uniform look. Then when you're done, go ahead and put your little hat on, and you can use a glue gun for this as well. I am going to do both, and make sure that it's a low temperature glue gun. Now I'm going to go ahead and with my needle, I'm going to attach the back of the hat first. I will come back later and add, like I said, some low temperature glue around the sides and the front. But in the meantime, this attaches my hat and keeps it in place so I can continue to work the rest of the project until I get my glue gun situated. All right, so the other thing I'm going to do is I like my little hats to be a bit wrinkled. So I'm going to shape them myself into place to where I want it to sit. And then after that, I'm going to attach all of my Christmas decor, including the back, to put it on the Christmas tree. Now, I prefer my beards to look kind of curly or furry. And so to give it a curly look, all you have to do is unravel the strings. And I prefer to do this when the beard is attached and it's not going to move around or do anything. So again, all you're going to do is unravel each strand, and that makes it curly. If you like more of a fuzzy look like this, then get a wire brush like this one, and all you have to do is brush the strands of yarn and they will turn into this little fuzzy type of beard. And make sure that you've attached the beard really good if you're going to do this. In fact, maybe even before attaching the beard, you can do this. For me, I found it easier once I had glue gun the beard in place and I knew it wasn't going to go anywhere, because otherwise, if you do this too hard, it could just fall apart on you. And then of course, you can come back and trim them again if that's what you want. For me, I wanted them to look really a bit uniformed and neat, and so I did trim the beards after I had given him this kind of fuzzy, furry type of beard. If you want some matching string to attach your decor to your ornaments, you can just unravel the yarn and that'll give you a matching string, but I will caution you that this string is very weak. And so you're either gonna have to come back a lot of times with it for it to keep your item attached, or you're gonna have to come back and add a little bit of glue to whatever you used to attach this with. I just like that things kind of hide away, right? All right, so this is really important. You need to like this video if you liked it, share it because it helps me big time, and leave me a comment and tell me how you feel about this so I know what to do for you next time. All right, so guys, if you haven't subscribed, do so, and don't forget to click the little bell so you don't miss anything.